Welcome to another logo showcase. In the past few years, you've seen me cover Designing Women, the most outrageous episodes of Married with Children, and In Living Color. But today, I'm doing things differently. I am going to cover not 1, not 3, not 4, not 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, Okay. I'm doing 2 shows. And these 2 shows have quite a few things in common. Both shows are produced by Columbia Pictures Television, both are sitcoms, both lasted 3 seasons each, and both had their first 2 seasons released on DVD by Shout Factory. Now come on, take a guess. Okay, time's up. You lose. I bet some of you try to cheat by skipping ahead and see what I'm talking about. Now you get nothing. Okay. In all seriousness, the 2 shows I'm covering are My 2 Dads and Parker Lewis Can't Lose. Originally, I didn't want to cover those shows because I prefer to cover complete series. But after doing some thinking, I feel like I can use this as a platform to push an agenda.
And we will make America great again!
No, this isn't some pro-Trump or anti-Trump video. This is more about how we need to finish what was started. These shows lasted 3 seasons and only had the first 2 seasons released. I don't see why they couldn't just finish it up and release those 3rd seasons, or at least release some complete series sets. They're everywhere at Walmart. And again, 3 seasons! So why would it be hard to get those out there? But we can talk more about this later. Now, Shout Factory seems to have a good record retaining anything CPT logo related, if Designing Women is any indication. Now let's see what those 2 shows do. Come with me as we look at 4 seasons combined of 2 shows that really need that closure to these releases for good. But as of this video's release, we're still waiting. Till then, let's see how they do with retaining old logos. This is a logo showcase I call the Shout Factory 2.
Mr. Lewis? Mr. Randall? Mr. Phillips? Hello?
We'll go with the chronological order. Start off in the late 80s with My 2 Dads. Now I imagine some of these social justice types will hear this title and go, "Ooh, LGBT sandwiches of guacamole and cheese!" Well, no. These 2 dads are straight. You got business yuppie Michael Taylor, played by Pre-Mad About You Paul Reiser, and free-spirited artist Joey Harris, played by Greg Evigan. Years before, they fought over the affections of one woman. Fast forward years later, she dies, and she had a 12-year-old daughter named Nicole, played by Stacey Keenan. And one of these 2 guys is her dad. Where's Marty when you need him? And Judge Wilbur, played by Florence Stanley, gave the 2 men the custody of Nicole. And the show showcases the lives and the adventures of the 2 dads and their daughter. My 2 Dads enjoyed a modest 3-season, 60-episode run on NBC. And for the production front, the show is produced by Michael Jacobs Productions, who would go on to bigger things, and originally start off at TriStar Television during its first run in 1986-1987, and would be passed on to Columbia Pictures Television after reorganization of the mother studios, involving Coca-Cola selling the entertainment business to TriStar. CBT would produce My 2 Dads for the rest of its run. And now we'll begin our journey with the first season of My 2 Dads, originally aired in 1987-1988. Will we see some torch ladies? Some flying horses? I don't know if there's a plural for Pegasus. Pegasuses? Pegasi? Who cares? You want to see logos? So let's see them already. And that was My Two Dads Season 1. And how did they do? Well, they got the 1988 part down perfectly. That during a change to CPT after said reorganization. You even have a couple episodes of variance to music, specifically the first two notes gone and fading in on the third note. Interesting variant of the music. But the 1987 part with TriStar is a different story. The original TriStar Pegasus appeared on 3 episodes. 3 out of 11 episodes that aired in 1987. I want some more Pegasus, damn it! Well, actually, there is one more, as in the 1993 variety from TriStar TV's second run of 1991-1999. I was actually surprised to see that pop up because at the very least, the show going under a CPT umbrella, you would have at least expected a newer CPT logo if they were gonna go in that direction. But no, you got TriStar TV Pegasus 93. Interesting. And as for those 3 original TriStars, they were followed by the first Televengers logo from 1987. So that shows me they weren't sourced from original NBC airings, but from international prints of the show. And worth mentioning, there are episodes from the NBC airings. They're all in the 1988 portion. I know because the beginning has an NBC in stereo or available notice. But back to Televengers, it makes one more appearance in the form of the more recent logo from 1988 in a 1988 episode after a CPT logo, interesting enough. It is the only one seen after a Columbia logo. Talk about your odd ducks. But on to Michael Jacobs Productions. They had the same logo used throughout. Nothing much to say there visually, but on the audio front, it was interesting to see the evolution of the closing theme. The pilot just had a closing soundtrack theme. The next 2 episodes used the outro of the My Two Dads theme. Then for a while, a music cue for My Two Dads would be used. Watch the show, you'll see what I mean. And eventually, in the 1988 portion, you would go on to the saxophone piece of the 80s style drum beats, which fits the logo well. Even has a few of the music high pitched, and even a few logos that are silent. And one more thing, the 1987 portion, you can tell there is plastering when it comes to CPT, because listen to the TriStar closings, you can hear the music going into that logo. But anything plastered by CPT, it just ends abruptly as the CPT logo plays. Something to note, people. And for my final grade, I'm giving this a generous C+.
I have no strong feelings one way or the other.
It got the 1988 Columbia portion down pat, while the 1987 portion did include a few original TriStars, so you can at least say the 1986 TriStar TV Pegasus is indeed on DVD for you logo collectors. At least in that regard, you won't be disappointed. Oh, one more note. I did hear back in 2009, apparently Shout Factory was supposed to release Werewolf on DVD. You know, that drama that aired on Fox, also a Noble TriStar production from that first run, but ultimately got cancelled due to music rights. Quite the common death knell for some TV on DVD releases. Just ask SNL. But I wonder, what would the preservation have been like? Will we get some more TriStar TV? All CPT? Or what about that oddity seen on a couple episodes that has the TriStar Pictures logo? No typo, I mean the full theatrical logo as seen on movies from TriStar. How did they manage to goof that up? But I guess unless Shout Factory decides to step up and give it a go, I guess this is something that will be forever left as speculation. And now we move on to Season 2 from the 1988-89 season, although like many shows, was affected by the 1988 writer's strike. So this didn't even debut until January 1989, and it ended up as a mid-season replacement. Now the interesting thing about this DVD set is it was actually a manufactured on-demand release. The first season, which was retail, didn't quite do enough to justify bringing its second season to stores, but just enough to make it exclusive online to satisfy those who need their My Two Dads fix. I ended up buying it from the Shout Factory website myself. So the first season was middling in preservation. How does S2 hold up? Well, chances are good we'll get a good amount of CPT, since again, Shout Factory does a pretty good job keeping these. Well, let's pop in a disc and find out. And that was season 2 of My Two Dads. And what can I say? Perfectly preserved all the way with CBT logos. All episodes on there. All the 80s torch ladies. Top notch, Shout Factory. Top notch. Now onto the notes. You'll notice that around episode 3 on now, with the exception of episode 5, the torch lady herself got a revision. Before, it was just an all go torch lady on a blue cloud background, and the company named the byline All Go 2. But then, they switched it up where they use the actual theatrical logo from Columbia Pictures as the basis of the TV logo now. Now yes, some people might note that the television part of the name looks awkward compared to how the rest of the words in the name look. And yes, you could argue a low effort of the name wouldn't hurt, but I don't hold it against it because it works as a serviceable television logo, and that's all it needed to be. Plus, I think the revision makes sense because the blue go torch lady looks dated, like you would expect from the mid-80s, while the Columbia movie logo of the time has a bit of a more modern, refined look. Plus, I think Tim Thompson's horn fanfare fits better with the newer design than the old blue gold one, which I associate more of that Coke fanfare from back in the day. And also of note, this is a change seen on other shows, as if you saw my Designing Women logo showcase. If you haven't, then do it right now. Pause the video, I'll leave the link in the description. Pause the video. I'll wait. You watching now? Good. Now we can resume. Anyway, season 3 of that show made a switch to newer design around January of 1989, as well as did other shows, including this one. I hope these other shows can pop up here on YouTube eventually. Maybe Pannoni can deliver the goods. Give him a sub on his various accounts today. But anyway, I'm happy for the preservation, not only because that's the way it should be, but also because to see the evolution of the CPT logo take effect in the show. Definitely one of the more interesting things of watching the closings. And one other thing to note, the 3rd and 4th episode, the Michael Jacobs production logo theme had a brief change. In most of these, you had a saxophone theme with the drum beats, but for that brief moment, it made a change where the theme was more of a rock synth remix of the saxophone theme. Interesting change here, but it's like what everyone says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I've seen so many people ignore this virtue over the years. But thankfully, Michael Jacobs wised up and brought back a saxophone theme as it fit in much better with how the logo plays. So to wrap this up, this set gets an A+. And not only that, it's earned another award. Something the Volume 1 set of the most outrageous episodes of Married with Children, Season 6 of Designing Women, and Season 2 of In Living Color would have earned had it existed back in the day. But now, I presented to all these, including My Two Dads Season 2. Introducing the Mayfield Entertainment Perfect Preservation Award. Something you wear proudly to make the fellow logo enthusiasts happy. These DVD sets can wear the symbol of pride. From now on, I require the companies who have DVD sets of old TV shows with everything preserved to have this label on your packaging. I'm making it official. Make it happen, damn it! Contact these companies so we can make this happen. Make logos great again. More like da, more like da, more like da. Okay, that's enough. Now before we move on to the next show, let's just talk about that season 3 we didn't get. It would be the 1989-1990 season, and based on a few episodes I did see put on YouTube, it would be pretty much the same as we see on most of season 2, Michael Jacobs and CBT Theatrical Torch Lady, so nothing really to say. My Two Dads would end its 3-season run on NBC in 1990, and as that show ended, we now turn our attention to the Fox network. Back then, it wasn't a channel everyone got like the big 3. Only people living in certain areas managed to get it, as it was one of those channels that could have been gotten on hard to find UHF stations. But for those fortunate enough to watch Fox, got to see some of the biggest groundbreaking comedy shows of the time, like Married with Children, In Living Color, and The Tracy Ullman Show, the sketch comedy series which had some animated shorts which would get their own TV series that's still going today. Maybe you heard of it? Simpsons? And this year, a new comedy show debut, which is our next subject in the logo showcase. Parker Lewis Can't Lose. This was a high school sitcom with Cora Nemec as a titular character. a cunning, mischievous high school student who clashes with Principal Grace Musso and his bratty little sister Shelley. He also has an entourage of 2 friends, the rebellious Mikey and the nerd Jerry. A rumbustious high school student with 2 friends in conflicts with his principal and little sister? Why does this sound familiar? Oh yeah! Funny enough, around the time this show aired, NBC actually adapted Ferris Bueller for TV, and while the latter would end up lasting 13 episodes, Parker Lewis would make it for 3 seasons and 73 episodes. It would be known for its goofy and surreal humor, and made a bit of a small impact in pop culture. Family Guy made a reference to it. It's mentioned in the song Black Puddin' by SWV, and Fall Out Boy even has a song called Parker Lewis Can't Lose, but I'm gonna give it my best shot. And its quirky humor influenced shows such as Ally McBeal, Scrubs, and Malcolm in the Middle. Not bad for a 3-season show, and this show would receive so much support, Shout Factory stepped in and released it, and now here we are with the first season, originally aired in 1990-1991. Production-wise, while Sony acquired Columbia Pictures the previous year, it was still in the Columbia Pictures Entertainment days, as it would be reflected in a logo for CPT. It would also produce a show alongside Clyde Phillips Productions, which you would see at the end credits of Mr. Lewis, Mr. Randall, Mr. Phillips, hello! Will we also be saying hello to Mr. CPT? Oh wait, it's a Torchlight. So it's Miss CPT? Well, she's married. Then Mrs. CPT. Who cares? Let's just look at logos.
Mr. Lewis? Mr. Randall? Mr. Phillips? Hello? 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 Mr. Lewis? Mr. Randall? Mr. Phillips? Hello?
Alright, that was season 1 of Parker Lewis Can't Lose. Out of 26 episodes, 25 had the original CPT Torch Lady. So yeah, one shy of earning yourself a Mayfield Entertainment Perfect Preservation Award. It's a shame, but hey, it's still great preservation otherwise. Take what you can get, you know? Be grateful that Shout Factory stepped in and not Sony Pictures Home Entertainment. Would you really want to be bombarded by this for 26 episodes? I wouldn't. After all, it's like the famous commercial. This is your brain. This is your brain on SPT. Any questions? So at the end of the day, the set earns an A+. It's just one episode off. 0.5 out of 26 is a great ratio. Now we move on to Season 2 from 1991-1992. A DVD set I had a hard time getting, by the way. Tried to get one from Australia, and yes, it was Region 1, but as it turned out, it was out of stock. Then I spent $100 on eBay from a user who ended up sending me a Season 1 copy. Thankfully, I got a refund for it. Then I tried Amazon and got it at a, well, still a little pricey, not quite as steep as $100. And here we are today. I would hate to have to scrap this local showcase because I couldn't get one set, so I'm happy it all worked out in the end. And for production front, this is around the time Columbia Pictures Entertainment would be renamed Sony Pictures Entertainment, and a CPT logo went byline-less. And to note, the season started a little earlier than usual, August 11th, 1991. Actually, 4 days after the formation of SPE. So I'm hoping to see that logo evolution between the two revisions of the Torch Lady. Well, let's have a look, and I hope I'm not disappointed.
Mr. Lewis? Mr. Randall? Mr. Phillips? Hello? 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 Mr. Phillips? Hello? Mr. Lewis? Mr. Randall? Mr. Phillips? Hello? Mr. Lewis? Mr. Randall? Mr. Phillips? Hello?
Mikey? Jerry? Clyde? Hello?
Mr. Lewis? Mr. Randall? Mr. Phillips? Hello?
Now we wrap up Season 2 of Parker Lewis Can't Lose, and we had 25 episodes, and 6 was plastered with the 1993 revision of the CPT Torch Lady, specifically seeing the distribution variant on 5 of them. So the preservation job was a slight step down. Thankfully, I did get to see the aforementioned evolution. Taking note, the second episode with the CPE version aired on August 18th, 1991, while the third episode with the bylineless version aired on September 1st, 1991. Take note of this, CLG writers. Also to note, the CPE version made one more appearance on October 6, 1991. Holdover from an earlier filmed episode? So final grade here, B+.
Good job.
And as for Season 3, it's a damn shame we didn't get it, as we had a logo evolution taking place around then, for both Clyde Phillips Productions and CPT. With some videos of S3 episodes that were there, it started with the standard from Season 2, but would change. First with Clyde Phillips Productions, where it changed to the water shimmering and the company name appearing. This is a good upgrade because let's face it, the first one was a product of 1990. You know, that part of the 90s which still looked like the late 80s. So it was fitting for its time. But as the 90s started finding its own identity, the logo became quickly dated, so facelift for Clyde Phillips will be received with that easygoing guitar tune. Good call there. And as for Columbia Pictures Television, this is around the time the Torch Lady got the new design, which will be implemented into the television and home video logos. And of course, we have used Tim Thompson's theme for at least another year. I don't think the horn fanfare mixes well with the newer logo, but I see it as bridging the gaps between the two Torch Ladies, especially considering movie productions still use the 80s logo for another year. It would have been interesting to see Season 3 and the passing of the torch, if you will. But there was a Season 3 release in Germany. But since I don't have a way to play PAL DVDs, I hope someone is out there who could pick up the slack and see what we have. So that's the end of the showcase. I hope you enjoyed the dive into the logos. But before I go, I need to get into something. My Two Dads and Parker Lewis Can't Lose weren't like shows that lasted like 8 seasons or so, only seeing one DVD release and then not bothering anymore. Murphy Brown being a prime example. But if it were a show that lasted that long, only one season set was released, that's forgivable. But Shout Factory! These were both shows that lasted 3 seasons, and you released 2 of them! Come on now! Finish what you started, people! It's so egregious that you're one short, especially since you got 2 out of the 3! And there are fans of both shows who just want the complete series. So please, give it to them! You don't have to have it in retail, just make it manufactured on demand. Just get it done, people! It's just that one missing hole that gets me. Am I OCD? Maybe a little. Or maybe I just want all these completed. Well, I don't know if Shout Factory will listen to me or not, but if you feel the same way, make yourselves known, and maybe they'll get those lost 3rd seasons released. And if they do, I'll make another showcase showing off those 3rd seasons. Well, so long everyone. This has been Matthew Mayfield, and I don't know when I'll be releasing something next, but remember, I'll be watching. Before I roll the credits, check out these people and give them a sub today. Links in the description. First is TV and Movie Archive. Good uploads like certain Blu-ray and Laserdisc openings, even some from outside the US, among other things. And also, Meg the Big Movie Fanatic 2002. He's a newcomer, only starting off in December 2018. Support him, if you never know, he could be on his way to become one of the great logo uploaders of the future. That's all. Mr. Cesar? Mr. Dixon? Mr. Mayfield? Hello?